Many people around the world will remember a very important night in early November 2008 when Barack Obama won the presidency. And less remembered because of the upswell of joy of that night for many people was a really bad thing also happened that night, which is that gay marriage lost a ballot referendum in California. It had been legalized by the courts earlier that year, so it was legal for a few months. A bunch of people got marriage licenses that summer and early that fall. And then it was put to the ballot, and Californians rejected gay marriage. Californians. And these LGBTQ activists in that state started looking at the data as it came in, right? Ballot initiative, you now know every county, every street, you kind of know where you stand in a way that they didn't before. And the results were shocking. LA County in 2008 voted against gay marriage. And so for these activists, they suddenly had this revelation that they could no longer dismiss homophobia as some, right-wing extremist thing being peddled by, imposed on them by some right-wing people in Mississippi through the Senate. Or like, their neighbors didn't think they were full human beings. Their neighbors in the most progressive places in the United States did not think they were full human beings. And so this incredibly brave group of activists in California, starting at the LA LGBT Center, set out to basically go door to door and start having conversations with those neighbors. Now, I should say, like all the things in the book, people only have to do this if this is the kind of thing they want to do. Like, every gay person does not need to go knocking on doors to find out about homophobia. This is purely voluntary. This is a group of hardcore activists who were like, no. Like, this is not just like some American Taliban, faction. Like, most people do not know who we are. What is going on? So they went door to door. And they first, in this kind of helter-skelter way that was over time formalized into a method, now a very rigorous method called deep canvassing, they just started having conversations with people. And they listened a lot. They built trust through listening, right? And they didn't call out as soon as they heard some bile. They're like, oh, that's some bile. You got any more bile? I got a huge bucket for your bile. Just like give me, spit out all your possible bile. I got another bucket in the car if you got more bile in you, right? Bile is finite, it turns out. People at some point have said all the homophobic things that can possibly occur to them. At some point they run out. They've gotten out of their system. They feel you've heard their complaints, their fears, their anxieties. And then the conversation begins. These canvassers, what they started to do was to look, they didn't try to implant their view in you. They tried to look for you to have potential sources of dissonance with your own view. Okay, so you're homophobic, but perhaps you see yourself as someone who's a kind of champion of underdogs. You've supported the Mets your whole life. You always pick the losing team. How does your self-image as someone who pulls for the little guy square with your punching down at gay people in your politics? Or you were once mistreated when you were a young woman at that law firm, the only one on that floor. How does your experience being treated that way as a woman square with what you were saying about trans people earlier in our conversation? This has now been scientifically verified, peer-reviewed studies, one of the most successful persuasion efforts going on in this country right now. It's slow. It takes half an hour to 45 minutes on the door. They operate on the scale of hundreds and thousands, not millions, but they have done remarkable work in moving people by recognizing a basic truth. If I could leave you with one thing, these deep canvassers believe what all the persuaders in my book believe in different forms, which is that people are much more complicated than we realize. People are live Civil War battlefields for their own soul about all kinds of issues. And in a time of polarization and division and the temperature just being raised on everything, we forget that. We know we're complicated, but as soon as it's people on the far shore from us politically, we think they're monoliths. We think they're simple. We think their homophobia is the only story about them. Their Trump voting is the only story about them. Their anti-vax, anti-science stance is the only story about them. And it's not true. People are these roiling internal contests. They stand bravely at the door and tell you their big stance, but inside, there's something that almost narrowly defeated that stance for the kind of ownership of their heart. And what every single persuader that I wrote about in this book does is try to harness, try to arm and equip some of those buried, currently losing sides of their personality and pit them against the winning side of their personality. Pit the desire to be seen as a good person against their transphobia. Pit their desire to see their country as being the greatest country in the world. Pit that against their miserliness on immigration, and so on and so forth.